Sit wherever you want. Sit wherever you want. So before I invite the panelists up, I'm going to take a moment to just ask a couple of questions of Yusef, because we'll talk about the criminal justice system more broadly in a minute. But I know that there's some questions that people have been wanting to know about his experience, and so I'm going to go there. But I just want to say that the Minneapolis Foundation is so pleased to have this conversation here. And for me, I'm trying to make it through the night because I feel like I'm right at home. And this is a topic, community, that if we don't come together on, because everyone doesn't have that mom, and everybody doesn't have that spirit, and everybody doesn't get that chance. And what is happening to our young brown and black boys is so upsetting. And I know we see it. I know we do. I don't know why I'm at the Minneapolis Foundation. Aside from RT calling me up, because I was happy at Pillsbury. Right, Adair? Where's Adair? Adair's happy I'm gone. But I was happy I was at Pillsbury. But I say that because I had a moment. Is John Sullivan here? I don't know, our board chair. I had a moment because when I was leaving Pillsbury United Communities, I was happy to be at the foundation, but I was missing a bit where I had been. And we went to lunch and we had a conversation, and he talked a little bit about a board that he was sitting on. And where he got to is sometimes you don't know why you're in a place until it's revealed. And I thought about that today when we were sitting, and I seen John's face poking through the crowd, right? That if I'm not there to serve this community, and if I don't do it with my full heart, then I don't need to be there. Because the Minneapolis Foundation is not just about giving out money. That is the littlest thing that we can do, is hand out dollars. The best thing we can do is elevate conversation. The best thing we can do is have everybody in this community understand you have a role, you have a place, and we need you. We 100% need you to be part of our community. We are here, we were born with something. We were born with something to give, and we can't get there by ourselves. I have 4 sons. There were 5 of them. I wanted Reverend Gallman and our imam and Keith and our commissioner and who am I missing? Our AG, our chief. These 5 black men that are in leadership roles in our community, the 5 of them. Because it's really easy not to see what was happening. 1989, 5 young black men, 14 to 16 years old, went to jail. They were interrogated for 14 to 30 hours without a parent. How many people talk to their sons about getting pulled over? How many people talk to their sons about what do you do if you get arrested? I didn't do that. I didn't think that far. In 1989, I was graduating from high school. 1989, I believe the chief became a police officer. This is in our lifetime where people are fabricating the facts. I don't know what we're going to do, folks, but this is my issue. And I want you to see the Minneapolis Foundation as a place that you can come and get connected to. We know philanthropy hasn't always been for everybody. I know that. But I also know this community has given over and over again, and you may not see yourself as philanthropists, but you are. I want to make it super clear that everyone is invited to the table. And that in order for us to make the type of change, it's not someone else that's got to do it. It was that officer, because we're going to talk about some officers, but this officer that he's talking about came and changed the way that he saw this situation, how he saw himself through a simple question, by not being invisible, by not being part of a pack, but he saw him. Ava DuVernay talked about when they see us, because she wanted to examine, what do you see when you see brown and black boys? What do you see? She wanted to create visibility around this issue, and she's done a fantastic job. So I thank you for being here and being part of this conversation. So I don't know about y'all, but if I went to jail for 7 years about something I didn't do, I'd be mad. And you got a spirit that I've just been embracing from the moment. And so if you don't know the story, when the night that this aired, I'm probably halfway through part 1 on that Friday. I'm like, I have to talk to somebody. I need to talk to someone. So I get on, I Google, I find him. He responds back in 24 hours and said, yep, I will come. I don't know how I made it to the top of the inbox, because I've seen his inbox. I don't know. The whole time I'm like, oh my gosh, they're getting Emmys and stuff. Like, will somebody book his flight? You know, because all that self-doubt was coming into play. But I'm really thankful. But I just need to understand, and because there's people in this place that are going through some stuff. And how did you tap into that joy, that spirit, a spirit of grace?
So I'm angry as well.
Okay.
I may not appear to be angry, but I heard the words of Nelson Mandela. And what he said was, being angry and bitter is like drinking poison and expecting your enemies to die. And I really, truly internalized those words. I said, wow, I'm sure Donald Trump is not eavesdropping on this conversation right now. But imagine my anger towards him and all that rolled down the hill on us and all that continues to happen. But see, God is so merciful that he said, for every great story, we need to have a great villain. So when I heard the words of Dr. Maya Angelou, it redirected my anger like an alchemist towards something more powerful. And what Dr. Maya Angelou said was, she said, you can be angry, but you must not be bitter. She said, bitterness is like a cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. And then she gave us an action. She said, so use that anger. You march it. You dance it. You vote it. She said, you voted. She said, you voted. She said, you talk it. Never stop talking it. I found value in sharing my story, in regaining control of my narrative and allowing it to empower me so that I can empower others. When I was in prison, the other part of that story, when that officer came and asked me that question, it caused me to get into the understanding of who am I from the context of God allowing me to be born at this place, at this time. What am I supposed to do? And everybody who is here on purpose and with a purpose. As a matter of fact, when our parents got together, we were one of over 400 million options, all racing to the egg.
That's
and
awesome.
we swam the fastest. It could have been somebody else. It could have been somebody else. And when I was born, instead of having a baby shower, as sometimes we find in normal society, we also have in normal society baby naming ceremonies. 7 days after I was born, my parents, after they had been charged with trying to figure out who is this, they were searching to find who has come, a beautiful soul, a powerful one. And they named me Yusef Idris Fadil Abdus Salam. I found out in prison, I never knew this before. My mother said that Yusef means boy born with hair on his head. It's probably because I had the flat top when I asked her what my name meant. But I found out in prison that Yusef means God will increase. I found out that Idris means the teacher. I found out that Fadil means with justice. And I found out that everybody knows Salam means peace. So I was floored while I was in prison, finding out for the first time that I was born for this, that I was being shaped for this, that part of my future self, if I could have projected myself into the future to see me, I would have realized the great purpose. And so now I'm here and I'm saying to myself, what better way to redirect? What better way to reshape? What better way to repoint frustrations and anger than realize, one, that we got comeback power. We can accomplish anything as long as we try to land on our back when we fall in life. And everybody falls. Everybody falls. It took us 7 years to get up under the hell of prison. It took another 3 to get up under the oppression of going back and forth to the parole office. And then when they found out we didn't do it, 13 years after we were accused of this crime, it took them another 12 years for them to settle our lawsuits. It's a hard road, but we can do it because we got comeback power.
The comeback power. I'm going to invite our panelists to come up. We got our Attorney General Keith Ellison, our Commissioner of Public Safety John Harrington, our Police Chief Arradondo. Here you go, fellas. We got 3 mics, I think one over here.
It's another one here too.
Oh, there's one on the table. Someone told me that too. Here you go. So I probably should be on the end because I really want these guys to talk.
I can switch with you.
All right, let's go.
Let's do it.
Let me not trip up in my church. Oh, goodness. Okay, so we got our 3 top cops in the state. Look at what they're looking like, people. This is an amazing opportunity, and we know that nothing is all bad, and we know nothing is all good. So we're going to be fair about this conversation, and I know that you all have probably had some experiences, either in your family directly, that you may have seen some things in your career journey that may cause some concern, that may call out the question, and what are you going to do with this moment? And so I'm really curious. I'm not going into bios because we're limited on time, but I do want to just talk for a moment. I'm going to pivot, if that's okay with you, and then we'll figure out how to make this float. But there's a lot happening with our brown and black boys, and I just want to just see what should we know that you're working on?
Well,
Well,
how's it going, everyone? So I would like everybody to know that Commissioner Harrington and I have begun a working group on officer-involved shooting. We're using the resources of our office. We're working together to bring attention, to put some of the folks who've got a lot of experience. In fact, our police chief is on the task force working group, and we're gonna really drill into how do these cases get properly investigated so that we know that it's fair, all the evidence is looked upon in a proper way. There's no early routing of the case in one direction or the other, and the only thing we're looking for is truth, and then that the case would be prosecuted in a way that is also fair, observing due process, but also holding people accountable, including law enforcement where that's appropriate. I don't think there's ever been a attorney general and a commissioner of public safety together with the leader of the largest police force in the state come together to examine this critical issue. So that's just one thing that we're doing. I will say this, it's absolutely true that black and brown boys are in the target zone of the criminal justice system, but I think if Kimberly Crenshaw was here, she'd say black women are, 18.5% of the criminal justice system. Their incarceration is rising faster than the rate of other people, and that it really is a community-wide problem of the incarceration of black and brown people.
And Chief, I know that you've been doing some work. So we know that we have systems that don't work for our communities and that racism is embedded. And we have people working in the force that have grown up not around our communities, that don't know how to interact, and they're coming with their own set of impressions on who we are. What work are you doing at NPD?
So I appreciate that. So one of the things that we must do is we have to first examine and look at our history of policing in this country and certainly within the MPD. And we know that we all come to the table with implicit bias. And so we are not only having the trainings, but we're inviting community to come in and talk about the history, to talk about at times some of the pain, some of the institutional structures of what that looks like, and we're going to continue to do that. But one of the things that I do is I have made it a point to sit down one-on-one with every single candidate, whether they're a community service officer, recruit candidate, or cadet applicant, sit down in my office one-on-one and talk to them. So as Dr. Yusef talked about, who am I? I ask them, who are you? And why do you want to wear this uniform and this badge? And what does it truly mean for you to serve our community? And so, but I do that. I also have an obligation to my community to make sure that I'm doing that. And so we have those tough conversations, but they're needed. They're important. We are often the first visible face of government. We come into people's lives, oftentimes when they're trying times. And the last thing we need is to allow that implicit bias to take over and control that dynamic, that encounter, that situation. So that's just some of the things that I'm making sure that we're doing.
Chief, I want to compliment you on that because I know that is a new tactic that has not always been done. When I started out in police work, and that's 1977, so a few years before '89, the choice of who was a cop was left to some other group, whether it was the union or civil service, but it was not the chief executive. And I remember you and I having that conversation as we began looking at how do we create police departments that are both reflective of the values of our community and, just as importantly, responsive to the community's values and to their needs. And that's a lot of what is going on, I think, between the three of us right now is we are engaged in a conversation. We're engaged in a problem-solving effort to try and be responsive to all of our community, not just the powerful and not just those that normally have say at the legislature, but everybody in the state. Like the governor has been very clear to me, he expects all voices to be brought to the table. And that's a large part of what we're doing here. I am just incredibly energized by this conversation. Partly because I happen to work with a guy who I think would have had that conversation with you. A nonprofit that I work with called Ujamaa Place. And it's an oddity because it's a cop and a prison warden who started a program to help young black men who are coming out of correctional settings never go back again. And over the years, we've seen, thank you, we've seen 4,000 young men come through the door, and we have seen less than a handful go back again. I can picture Otis Zanders, who's the executive director, used to be the warden at Red Wing, having had that conversation with you, because he is the kind of person who would look in your eyes and go, you're better than the title, you're better than the number that they put on you, you're better than that. And so I am incredibly engaged in the idea that this working group we're going to have on preventing and reducing deadly force encounters, that getting more diversity into the police department and getting the voices of Minnesotans heard by people that have the power of life and death, that is some of the most important work we can do. And I'm just happy to be in a position to be able to help facilitate those conversations.
Earlier today, we've been together all day talking. And earlier today, I asked the question, do you think that we can reform the criminal justice system? What did you say?
I said that the criminal justice system appears to be working exactly how it was designed. And I love the fact that, as you described, being able to look at the history of policing in this country, because part of the dynamic is for us to be able to plant proper seeds in the future in order for the shift to happen. And what I mean by that is, I remember when I was in California about to do a presentation, and we were having some technical difficulties, so one of the young ladies stood up, 13 years old, and she said, I'm a cadet. I want to be a cop. What advice can you give me? And because of my experience with police, everything in me was telling her to run. You know, like I was actually trying to find, movies like Get Out didn't happen yet, but if they had, I probably would have been looking for my phone so I could turn the flash on to kind of try to spark her, But then something really beautiful happened. And by beautiful, I mean I began to realize that I was talking to the future. And I began to understand that as talking to the future, I had a very great opportunity at this moment. And I began to talk to her about the experience that I saw around the nation as I go around and I speak, where every single cop vehicle I've ever seen has a variation of the words to serve and protect or something like that. And I said, that's actually a noble thing. I said, as a matter of fact, most of the imagery that we have about policing is because of the small number of bad cops and not the good cops that are doing their jobs. And so I went a step further and I said, on the side of cop cars in New York City, we have these 3 words also added to this noble thing. And those words are courtesy, professionalism, and respect. And I said, man, I would love to be treated courteously. I would love to be treated professionally. And I would love to be treated with respect. And all up until this experience happened to me, I felt like that was a reality. And then this system, the spike wheels of justice, ran my whole family down. And my faith in the future of what could be was restored partially because of a traffic stop. I ran out of my house going to another speaking engagement and left my wallet and everything but my keys. So I'm in the car's going, I'm riding down the road, I'm running a little late, so I see the light is green, and then it just turned yellow, and I said, well, it just turned yellow, so I'm okay. Kept on going, and got stopped. And the officer pulls up and says, license and registration. And I said, sure. I said, I left my license and my registration at home. So he said, well, that's fine. You have somebody at home to get it? And I said, unfortunately, I don't. And he said, well, we're going to have to take you to jail. So I was thinking quickly because I was trying to figure out, oh, man, this is bad. I'm supposed to be going to a speaking engagement, and I'm getting arrested.
That's the part you thought of?
Oh, man.
The speaking engagement.
Well, of course, I didn't want to go back to jail.
Okay. I'm like, what about that part?
Yeah, that was traumatic. That was absolutely going to be a traumatic experience. And so I said, wait. I can prove who I am. And the officer said, like, who's this guy? You know? And I said, remember the Central Park jogger case? My name is Yusef Salaam. The black officer backed up. Then he tapped the white officer. Hey, man, you may want to back up a bit. He said, you're not going to call Sharpton on us or Farrakhan. But the reason why I said it turned into a beautiful thing is because the officer then said, I have to write you a ticket because we called it in. But do not miss your court date. I go to court, the officer's there, my case gets called, they give the judge the ticket, the judge reads the ticket, and he looks down, looks up, looks down, looks up, and I'm prepared to kind of talk my way out of this one, right? And he says, is this what happened? The officer said, yes. Judge says, case dismissed. I said, oh, man. Now, mind you, the officer looked like he was pissed off. I mean, this officer put his hat on, left out of the courthouse, and I kind of was like, is it safe for me to go out in the hallway? You know what I'm saying? I go to the hallway, and the officer is standing there, and he extends his hand to me, and he shakes my hand. And this is the white officer. He said, I am so sorry for what happened to you. And I can't change what happened, but at least I was able to do this part. And so that to me was like a second chance. That's like the officers that I used to see in the community that would walk around the neighborhood that knew our names, that saw little Bobby or, Malik or someone in the store, running in the store and looking around because they hungry and grabbing a bag of chips. And then scolding him and saying, listen, man, you don't want to continue like this, and then giving him the proper guidance as opposed to lock him up and throw away the key. And so I have hope in a system that there's opportunity for it to be restored. My concern is when I think about the history of the abolishment of slavery to the slave codes, to the new Jim Crow, and to where we are now, even with black officers being vilified. I remember when a few years ago there was an undercover black officer who saw a crime happening, ran after the suspect, and was ready, he was going after him. An officer that was in his uniform sees this and shoots down the black officer, killing him, thinking that he's a suspect. And so the implicit bias thing is so difficult because even we as a people, we sometimes have this notion where if we see somebody on TV, we don't think that this is just a suspect, that this person should be looked at as innocent until proven guilty. But when the person has the complexion for acceptance, as opposed to the complexion for rejection, they are afforded all kinds of opportunities. And I applaud what's happening here. because I felt like this could be a model for the rest of the country. Because man, what happened a few years back in what was it, South Carolina, North Carolina?
South Carolina.
Dylan Roof shot up the church. Not only was he taken alive, but they took him to Burger King after
The
that.
guy yesterday.
I mean, stuff like that. And see,
What happened?
Well, the white supremacist who shot up and killed people in El Paso, was taken in without any incident at all. And they were treating him with respect and like he was presumed to be innocent. And, they arrested him, but it was a very easy thing. And I'm not saying they should give him a beat down I'm just saying that's how they treat everybody else.
right.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
justice
So-
doesn't look like white people getting shot, just like black people getting shot. That's not what justice looks like. Justice looks like fairness across the board. It doesn't look like two Americas where some are afforded the opportunities of being represented and others are not. That's why I said I applaud what's happening, because literally, like, everything is, we're 100 years, 100 plus years outside of the so-called abolishment of slavery. And so based on that fact alone, we're a very young nation. All of the old ideas that kept us under the foot of the oppressor is being shifted and changed. And one of the greatest things I think happened is when we started saying we need to be inside to at least make sure some of us are still alive.
That's right.
Can I just make
Yeah.
a quick observation? I agree with you, Dr. Yusef, about the past, but I'm really concerned about the future when it comes to can we reform the criminal justice system? Because when you think about how our economic system is tied to massive incarceration, one of the things we will have to do and do now and do into the future is make sure that groups like Geo Group and these people who profit off of mass incarceration can no longer continue to do so. And I will say that the reason the 13th Amendment has that provision that you can enslave someone is basically because of convict leasing. If you all study convict after the 13th Amendment, we still had slavery in the United States, but these were people who were convicted of a crime. And convict leasing, prisoners were used in the mining industry in Alabama, in Huntsville, and in Texas, and of course, we're picking cotton up until the 1940s. So the future of reform lies in disentangling our criminal justice system from our economic system and centers of profit.
I have a stack of questions, and I want to get to as many as we can, which means you're going to have to be concise for us to do this, because there's just a lot. There's a lot in this room. I got a question from a 7th grader. He said, I see my fellow students and friends and classmates that are going into the school to prison pipeline. What are your thoughts on it, and how can we change this for the better? Start with you, Commissioner.
We start with education, but I think, and this is something that we're talking about at my department right now, we start with the family, because if we support the family, then we will have children that will not just be able to be successful, but will prosper and blossom in our educational institutions. But we have to start with supporting that family, and supporting that means more than simply giving them a free lunch. It really does mean helping mom and dad be successful so that they can model the behaviors.
Anyone else?
I agree, education is critical, but understand the United States is more segregated in its schools today than it was in any time since 1988. And when I say segregated, I don't mean that we simply have more uniculture, uni-race schools than we used to. What I mean is what we used to mean by segregation, which is that the school systems have less resources, more burdens, greater challenges, more housing insecurity, and this stuff is all highly racialized. So yes, education, but we have got to desegregate our educational system. It is more segregated today than it was in 1988. And I think that if we look at education, we have got to take a real look at that. There's a case going on today called the Cruz Guzman case, and it's going on right now. It's a school desegregation case, and I think it warrants our attention.
Young man I went to school with, grew up in South Minneapolis, late 80s, unfortunately got involved into the whole drug culture, ended up committing a murder. He's been incarcerated all this time. Shortly after I became chief, he sent me a very nice letter and said, hey, Rondo, I'm involved in this Young Men's Restorative Justice Project out at Faribault Men's Correctional Facility. Would you come out and talk to us? I went out there, and I was thinking I might walk into a room with 20 or so young men. I get out there the first session in the gymnasium, there's probably about 150 young men. Second session, there's about 200. Every single one of them, and I've just recently gone out there last month, every single one of them said, Rondo, we're coming back into Minneapolis. If you do not have adequate housing for us, you're going to have heck to pay. Housing is very important to me, and all of these issues that have been spoken are important, but I've just seen how impactful housing is and how that touches in terms of public safety. So,
Can I just tap,
Yes, you can.
tap in real quick? One of the things that I always have tried to impart to young people is to have a bigger vision of themselves, to look at themselves in past, present, future, in that kind of sense, to understand that every action that they're doing matters. And even if you have someone poking at you, causing you to become emotional, they always talk about emotional intelligence. And I found out that emotions usually are not intelligent. Most of the times people make split decisions because they could be out of their mind for that moment. But looking at themselves in the bigger picture, thinking about the future, projecting themselves in the future. And then the flip side to that is that we as the elders, and I say elders because my 5-year-old probably said, man, Dad, you old. You know, and as the elders, being able to say something, being able to have that conversation with young people, because a lot of times they're just groping in the darkness, trying to find their way. And we've lived a life that sometimes we tend to sugarcoat to our children. Well, we might have been running the block, you know? So to give them proper guidance, proper understanding, proper direction, I think is important. And to let them know that we cannot think about the worst thing that was said to us. Because there's a lot of people out here that are telling us that we're not worth nothing, when the fact of the matter is that we're worth everything. And once we understand that and realize that, we begin to add to the positive that we want in the world and the good that we want in the world, as opposed to, well, say, shoot, if I ain't worth nothing, I'm going to produce worthlessness. I'm not going to produce excellence. So you got to turn your light up. You were born on purpose and with a purpose.
Turn your light up. That's tweetable. And then you said we should be doing this all over the country. So I know your Twitter followers, so you should say that out loud on your Twitter page. So here's a question. Do you believe that there is a better way to prevent wrongdoing than by punishment and the threat of punishment?
Wow. Actually, I think that punishment and the threat of punishment is one of the lesser effective ways to gain compliant behavior. Yeah. Think about how corporal punishment was sort of the regular way to do things. When I grew up, if you didn't spank your kids, you weren't loving them, you weren't disciplining them. What we have learned is, what you're really teaching them is that if I'm bigger than you and I can hit you, you can't hit, you don't really get better behavior through whipping your kids. And I know we probably get a big debate with some folks about that, but the truth is you actually don't. And so, I think it's important to understand that the incentives in our society really need to be re-altered, because you don't get massive incarceration based on based on a personal failing. You get it because the system somehow wants that, because somebody's profiting from it either through money or control. So What we got to do is make hard work actually pay, as opposed to hard work just means more hard work. You know, that means wages must go up, housing must go up. That means we've got to have quality education, and that means that we can't just look at, we've got to look at punishing kids as the wrong way to go. I'll say this real quick. There's a brother out here named Alex Pate, and he has a program called Innocent Classroom. And this classroom says we're not going to use punishment to gain compliant behavior with school, because we know that in our schools, and both me and John have talked about schools, we know of the excessive discipline on black kids in our schools. And what that ends up doing is acculturates them to another punitive system, the criminal justice system. The concept behind the Innocent Classroom is get to know the kid in the first month. Before you even talk about ABCs or algebra, get to know that child, respect that child, love that child, get to know why that kid is having an attitude that day. And then what you will do is you will get more compliant behavior. The kid will want to please you as the teacher, and you'll find yourself not having to throw kids out of class. It's more complicated, but
Thank you.
yeah.
What can be done about abuse and mistreatment of prisoners? You said lawsuits?
That's one of those places where holding folks accountable does work. A lot of police departments, one of the things that they're most afraid of is as being held accountable, and I think the lawsuits certainly do. I will tell you, though, Paul Schnell, who is the Commissioner of Corrections, one of his new innovations that it's not really new, but we're going back to it, is actually having an ombudsman for the prison where they can actually have someone there who will remedy the issues before they get egregious. Someone that's got to be on the inside watching out to say, how are we feeding people? Are we treating people with dignity? Are we treating people with respect? If we're doing those things, and folks are incarcerated for a reason, then their incarceration can be a time for learning and for growth. It doesn't have to be completely negative. But if we're not treating them with respect, if we're not treating them with dignity, if we're not giving them basic human rights, what we're going to turn out is someone who's, as your friend from Faribault said, they're coming back. And that's not meant in a positive way when I hear it from folks.
Yeah. In the case of the Central Park Five, the exonerated five, some of you were able to get your high school diploma and get a college degree. My understanding is that that's no longer available in our prison system. Is that true? Can people get their?
It's not true in Minnesota. Minnesota, you can still get college credits. You can still get GED in the prison here in Minnesota.
Okay.
So.
Can I say this? You all are the community. You voted for us. You're the community. When people start talking about cutting this for prisoners and doing all these harsh things to prisoners because somehow they deserve it, please do not let us politicians get away with that kind of talk. First of all, it's bad for the guards. Ask anybody who's a prison guard with a bunch of people who don't have anything to do. It is a public safety problem in the facility. You need activities. Think about doing a life bid. What do you have to look forward to other than programming? I mean, it's cruel, right? And then I think it's critical that you all speak up, because what politicians demagogue crime. They just do. Politicians demagogue crime. That's how we doubled all drug sentences in 1989 after Lynn Bias died. Get tough. And now we're just trying to recover from that insane episode in American history. Please help the process of reform by supporting political leaders who say we're going to make the penal system a truly correctional system, as opposed to just a torture chamber. I remember being in the state legislature, they wanted to take dessert away from people just to be mean. Literally just to be mean. So, I mean, I hope you all will speak up and let your voices be heard, because if you say, then the politicians will stop doing it.
Yusef, how are the other four guys doing?
One foot in front of the other. You know, life has been challenging, sometimes difficult, I think about Antron McCray often because, those of us who've seen the Oprah special, when they see us now, one thing that we didn't know about Antron, I knew this, but a lot of folks didn't know this about Antron, was that he was hiding in plain sight. His name is not Antron McCray, it's actually Antron Brown. And so when he would go for new jobs and try to, do new things and better himself, he would put down Antron Brown, hoping that no one would connect him to McCray. And so it's been such a challenge for him, I think, to be present, to put his head up, to look around because of that. So he's been hiding in plain sight. The others of us have been trying to make a way. I know Raymond Santana, he started his clothing line. Many of you probably seen his Brotherhood tee that he's put out with all the 5 names of us on the shirt. Kevin Richardson started the real estate company. Corey Wise, he's begun to do a lot of philanthropic work. And I'm not only a motivational speaker, but I'm involved in jewelry. I actually have my necklace on today. I actually drew this and gave it to the jeweler, and he created it exactly the way I drew it. Similarly, this ring that I have on as well is something that I drew and I gave to the jeweler. I've always drawn and loved drawing. I actually went to LaGuardia High School for art, and I have shirts on my website. I have hats on my website. A lot of these are keepsakes about the case and things like that.
He's got about 20 books right here that he's willing to sign afterwards, right?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. What efforts are being made to make policing a viable career prospect for people of color in our community?
Well, I think one of the things that we're doing is we are really trying to get this newer generation of possible candidates, like the young woman you met, Dr. Yusef, is that this is your community. We want them to be invested in it. We want them to have ownership in this. We want them to change the future of policing. And so we're meeting them in their spaces. We're meeting them where they're at. We're trying to recruit them, whether it's the places of worship, whether it's the schools. Another thing I will tell you that the days, and I'll look towards Commissioner Harrington because he's kind of like the grandfather of Minnesota policing here. No, don't take that too offense there, so.
His face said it all, yeah.
There you go, exactly. But the days of trying to go into the high schools or the colleges, you got to start much younger. You got to start having these, when you're talking about Dr. Yusef, young Malik, when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, it's really about trying to influence them at that age and wanting them to take pride in their community, take pride in their city. And so those are some of the things we're doing.
Awesome. And I think Officer Pettis, who attends this church, is doing some recruiting, trying to get women interested in policing. So if you have an interest, Kia Pettis, Officer Pettis that attends the church, is doing some recruiting efforts there. So fellas, how do we bridge hope and trust? That's deep. I don't know. How do we bridge hope versus trust?
You have to take a chance. But I believe that if we all step forward and work and hold our leaders accountable and hold ourselves accountable by staying involved, your hope can convert into trust, right? Your hope can be, but the first thing you got to do is step out there and try. I mean, many of us, our ancestors were held in bondage for over 250 years. What hope did you have if you were born and your mama was born, your grandma was born, all in slavery? Why would you ever hope that you could be free? Well, some still hoped. And after they got across the Ohio River, from Kentucky into Ohio State and got up, kept going, got to Canada, they trusted that they could live free or freer. But it starts, you've just got to try. And it takes a lot of guts to try. Dr. Salaam, it took you massive amounts of courage and faith to just believe you could be free. After you were convicted, I mean, it must have been easy to just feel like, man, all hope is lost. But that's not what you did. And you inspire all of us because you kept hope alive. to use a Jesse Jackson phrase. And then and one day you must have come to the point where you trusted that you were going to be free. And you are free. And you're freeing us.
I'll add to that, simply, we have to be open to having this conversation. I appreciate you providing this setting for the conversation. Booker Hodges, who's the assistant commissioner and was the chief down Prior Lake, has started a community conversation about what is the character of policing. And he's having this conversation all over the state. He's putting on a bunch of miles. He's Marshall to Thief River Falls, up to International Falls and back again. But we want to have this conversation because unless we know what our community wants from policing, it's not just difficult, it's impossible for us to recruit, train, and retain the right people who have the right attitude, who will be engaged in the trust and the hope business. I think I grew up in a cop family in outside Chicago. So I grew up with the idea that cops could be heroes. I grew up with that cop that you talk about that walked around in the neighborhood and said, looked at you and like, no, and just sent your butt back home without, there was no tag. They just sent you back home. But that gave me hope that I could one day be that cop. And my job now is to trying to find a way to make that hope broader, to bring, we were able to provide that hope to cops coming into my last couple departments. My question is, can I do it now on a statewide basis? Because if we can, then that CPR that New York is talking about, courtesy, professional respect, that can be universal. Everybody in Minnesota could experience that.
And I just want to say, the Attorney General's first day on the job, do you know who he came to visit? 9 o'clock in the morning? Me. Now, of course, as a chief, when the Attorney General comes to visit you, you get a little bit, for like something going on. But he came, sat with me for over an hour, and the whole basis of the conversation was, Rondo, how can I help you? How can my office help make your efforts for our community here in Minneapolis better? That is first day on the job, and I appreciate him for that. So,
I have a stack of about 25 questions, and we got 2 minutes. And what I would like to be able to do is ask a couple more questions. So we might go a little bit over time, not long, and then make a commitment to figure out how to get some responses up onto our website. Is that okay with you? I'll hear that. So if you were thinking about a question, you want a response, we're not going to get it today, but if you want it up on our website, use your index card. I also want to just say that we're trying something new at the foundation, and we want to know if this conversation worked for you or not. And so you have a survey card on your chair. If you would just fill that out for us, we would appreciate it. I want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly because we want to make this as good as we can for you. I also want to recognize our City Council President, Vice President Andrea Jenkins in the house. Commissioner Irene Fernando in the house. Jeremiah's here, our city council person, and son of our AG. They got a family legacy going on. I see his daughter next to him. Family are brilliant. She's quite the artist. So one question, and I think this is an important question because you guys were innocent, but there's a lot of young men and women in jail that are not. How do you see, what did you learn from them?
It depends on
Like the good stuff.
right. But I'm thinking about the degree of guilt. In other words, so like when I was meeting folks from the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army, as I was beginning to understand their plight, I was like, okay, that some of it might not have been considered bad, so to speak, but they were bucking the system and trying to get, ahead. But some of the valuable things that I learned were from that brother Luke mine that I met in the adult facility. I remember he told me, he said, you know, if you don't attach yourself to a few things, even though you were innocent, it will be much easier for you to come back. And so he encouraged me to get married. He encouraged me to get a job. And he encouraged me to find a place to live. And got married, got divorced. But 3 beautiful daughters were born out of that union. And I had a house. I was living in the penthouse, just didn't have no elevator. So it was a little bit of a challenge there. But when I met my current wife, she actually had 3 beautiful children, and so we instantaneously became the Brady Bunch. And as we began to grow our family, we grew 4 more. And so it's 10 children. And so part of the anchor, thank you, part of the anchor is to be able to have something to hope for your own self. Putting value out there to let you know that you're doing this for not only yourself, but for those children who are yet to be born. And so as I could look at my daughters, I have 7 of them. As I look at my sons, there are 3 of them. You know, I'm looking at the possibility of a huge tribe. And I want them to know that the decisions, the ideas, the things that I placed in the world were not only for my benefit, but for the benefit of them and also for the benefit of the world that they find themselves in as well.
So thank you. Let's get a hand for that. Was beautiful. It's important to note that we are, I think, at a point in our nation's history when we recognize that the doubling of federal drug sentences in 1989 was not a good idea. I don't know anybody who's like, yeah, the drug war was a good thing. But I mean, actually, when we did cocaine and crack sentencing, it used to be 100 to 1. We reduced it to 18 to 1, which is better than nothing. I know it's still not what it ought to be. But I think we need to take another step because I think we say, well, those are the nonviolent drug offenders. What about the violent offenders? But let me just tell you this. There are a lot of people in prison who did something that one could consider violent, but they've demonstrated true reform and rehabilitation. And I think it is at least time to look at a pardon system, commutation system that could recognize that. We don't really have one. We have pardons extraordinaire, and I know because I'm on the pardon board, we do grant pardons extraordinaire on a regular basis. That means after you've completed your prison sentence, then you can get it wiped clean. But out of 303 petitions for early release in Minnesota, we've granted absolutely 0. Now, maybe there's nobody who deserved it, but maybe there was. I got a feeling that when you're a politician who's going to grant someone commutation, you're thinking to yourself, what if this person does something and I let them out? My opponent's going to flame on and I'm going to look super bad. But if you, the public, will say, you know what? Some of these petitions need to be granted, that would help bring our system into alignment. And so I just want to lay that in front of you as we talk about not just the innocent, but also the guilty as well. And just know that prison sentences are so high that if you're like, you know what, I'm going to try my case, I'm going to trial, you're thinking you can get out in 6 months if you lie on yourself and plead guilty, or you can get 6 years or more if you say you want a trial. The sentences are too hard to even give people to get an honest plea bargain because the risk for going to trial is just too high. So.
Yeah. As we close, if you wouldn't mind sharing one thing that the public might be able to help you with that you're trying to get done. So I know you're trying to pass a budget. You want to hire more officers. We can argue if we need more or not, but I trust you. I trust that if you say you need them, you need them. I trust you. But what can we do?
I would say, and I think all of us have kind of echoed it here today, we need to make sure that we are instilling every day into our young people, our young boys and girls, hope. And it don't cost anything. And you don't have to be biologically related to them to do that. because I have seen, and we ultimately, our paths cross with those young men and women who have lived a life without hope, and it's not good. We need to everyone take ownership of our young people in our community and love them. We don't say that this work is about love, truly, and we need to see more of that out here in our community. So that would be what I would suggest. Thank you.
I ask you all to help support the effort to restore the vote. People in Minnesota, if you're convicted of a felony offense, if you're on probation or parole, you can't vote until you completed all of that. You may have never spent 5 minutes in prison. But if you, say, got a welfare fraud case, they may put a lot of time over your head just because you have to pay a lot of restitution. But why shouldn't you be able to vote? I believe we should decouple the criminal justice system and the voting election system.
Yes.
And let me tell you, in Maine and Vermont, you never lose your right to vote. Never, never. Maine and Vermont. In Florida, up until Amendment 4, you get convicted of a felony, you will never get a chance to vote. Texas the same way. We need to restore the vote, and I'm going to tell you why. So us politicians can have some accountability when we pass criminal justice laws. Somebody will say, hey, wait a minute, that may be a good idea, that may be a bad idea, but I'm going to tell you what my experience has been when you guys do stuff like that. And I think it will be good for democracy, so I hope you support it.
I'm actually going to answer your last question because my Ujamaa guys have given me an answer to that. What we need is we need to find a way to bridge the gap between faith and the political life and the public life. My Ujamaa guys have often talked about the trauma that they have lived through, the men and women of their lives that have been taken too soon, the time they spend in prison, the time they spent separated from their children, the time they spent homeless. And what they've said is what's kept them going was faith. Not any one particular faith, but that there was a faith that healed a hole that was in their heart that trauma gave them. And I would argue that what we need to be successful, we're going to need to bridge that gap between the faith community and public service, between police and the community.
I'm going to give our guests the last moment, but if you are part of the Minneapolis Foundation, will you just stand up? I see Luz. Luz, you part of us. Stand up. These folks have worked hard and wanted to be here tonight after a very long day. They're trying hard to do what they can do on behalf of this community. I thank them for all of the support that they've provided in getting this together.
So, 2 poems, very succinct. This first poem is called I'll Meet You in Between Venus and Mars. In between Venus and Mars is the center of our attraction. Of those connected to the stars, hardly a fraction. It behooves man to work for the day when this will all end. Life is mortal, so follow the way of those heaven sent. Awaken and receive that which will give you life, or remain horizontal and never begin the flight. For the solution, I'll descend from amongst the stars, and I'll meet you in between Venus and Mars. Just quickly, that poem was never revised. I was walking down the hallway in Clinton, and that download came to me, and I just wrote it down on a napkin and put it in my book. This next one was a poem that was given to me. And I was told that I can use it as my own, but I've always said that I would share this brother's name in this poem. He told me that he had 25 years to life. He didn't do the crime, but he and I became friends in prison. And this poem is called The Blank Canvas. Each of us are born into this world like a blank canvas, and everyone that comes across our path leaves a mark on the surface. And thus we grow. But there comes a time that we have to pick up our own brush and determine who and what will be. Just another painting or a masterpiece? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.